The coyotes circled in the distance, their hungry eyes gleaming in the dying light of dusk, as Chaya Morales struggled against the ropes biting into her wrists and ankles. Staked to the hard desert ground on the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas, she felt her throat burn with thirst and her body ache from exposure to the relentless summer sun of 1875. 3 days had passed since the rogue band of settlers had accused her of theft, ignoring her pleas of innocence and abandoning her to a cruel death for taking a horse that had never been in her possession. Chaya kept her eyes on the pack of coyotes that had been growing bolder as daylight faded. Her Apache upbringing had taught her about death, about facing it with courage, but she had never imagined her life would end this way, punished for a crime she didn't commit by men who saw her only as a savage, not as a human being. The sound of hoofbeats made her heart leap with both hope and fear. Through cracked lips, she managed to call out, her voice barely audible above the wind that swept across the plains. The hoofbeats slowed, and a tall figure on horseback appeared on the ridge against the setting sun. For a moment, the silhouette remained still, then the horse and rider moved toward her with purpose. Jake Dawson had been tracking a missing steer when he spotted what looked like a body on the flat plain below. As he drew closer, his blood ran cold at the sight of a woman staked to the ground. He dismounted quickly, drawing his revolver when he spotted the coyotes lurking nearby. A warning shot scattered them temporarily. "My God," he muttered, kneeling beside her. She was clearly Apache, her dark hair matted with dust, her face streaked with tears and grime, but her eyes burned with a fierce will to live. "Who did this to you?" he asked, already working to cut the ropes with his hunting knife. "White men," she rasped, "from town. They said I stole a horse." Jake's jaw tightened as he sliced through the last rope. "Can you stand?" she tried but collapsed against him, her legs numb from being bound for so long. Without hesitation, Jake lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, cradling her against his chest. "I'm taking you to someone who can help," he said, turning his horse toward the small cabin where old man Rivera, a Mexican healer known throughout the region, lived on the outskirts of Amarillo. The ride seemed endless to Chaya, who drifted in and out of consciousness. She was aware of the stranger's strong arms holding her, of his deep voice occasionally murmuring reassurances, and of the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them. Despite her tribe's warnings about white men, especially cowboys, there was something about this man that made her trust him. When they arrived at Rivera's cabin, the old healer took one look at them and ushered them inside. Jake carried Chaya to a small cot while Rivera gathered his medicines. "She needs water," Jake said, his voice rough with concern. Rivera handed him a cup. "Slowly," he instructed. Jake held the cup to Chaya's lips, supporting her head as she drank. When she had taken enough, she looked up at him with questioning eyes. "I'm Jake Dawson," he said simply. "I ranch about 10 miles north of here." "Chaya Morales," she replied, her voice slightly stronger. "My mother was Apache. My father was Mexican." Rivera worked methodically, cleaning her wounds and applying salves to her raw wrists and ankles. He spoke softly in Spanish, a language Jake understood only partially, but that seemed to soothe Chaya. "You will stay here tonight," Rivera told Jake. "It is too dangerous to move her until morning, and the coyotes are hungry." Jake nodded, settling into a chair near the door. He watched as Rivera prepared a tea for Chaya, murmuring prayers in a mixture of Spanish and Apache. The old man's reputation for healing went beyond conventional medicine. Some called him a shaman, others a witch doctor, but all respected his knowledge. As night deepened, Chaya fell into a fitful sleep, occasionally crying out in her native tongue. Jake remained awake, troubled by what had happened to her. He had seen the cruelty that sometimes flourished in these frontier lands, but staking a woman out for coyotes, that was a level of barbarism that made his stomach turn. Dawn broke with a gentle light that filtered through Rivera's tattered curtains. Chaya awoke to find Jake still there, his eyes tired but vigilant. "You stayed," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I did," he replied simply. Rivera entered with more tea and some flat bread. "You are stronger today," he observed, "but not strong enough for travel." Jake stood, stretching his tall frame. "I need to check on my horse and send word to my ranch hands that I'll be delayed. I'll be back." Chaya watched him go, conflicted about her feelings toward this cowboy who had saved her life. In her 23 years, she had learned to be wary of cowboys, especially those who worked the Texas Panhandle, where tensions between settlers and Native Americans ran high. Outside, Jake tended to his horse and considered his next move. He should report what had happened to Sheriff Collins in Amarillo, but he doubted much would come of it. The law often turned a blind eye to crimes against Indians, even half Apache women with Mexican surnames. When he returned to the cabin, he found Chaya sitting up, her dark hair now clean and braided, wearing one of Rivera's clean shirts that hung like a dress on her small frame. "Who were they?" Jake asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Rivera. "The men who did this to you." "Ranchers," she replied, her voice steady now. "They work for the Barton spread. Their horse went missing and they claimed they saw me with it." Jake's face hardened. "Barton's men have a reputation for taking what they want and blaming others. You know them." "I know of them. Barton's been trying to push smaller ranchers out for years. He's not particular about his methods or his men." Rivera, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Chaya cannot return to her people yet. The men who did this may look for her again." "My people," Chaya said softly, "are gone. My mother's band moved north after the soldiers came last year. I stayed behind with my father until he died 2 months ago. I have been working in town, cleaning at the hotel." The simplicity of her statement hit Jake hard. She was alone in a world that was hostile to her very existence. "You can stay at my ranch," he offered impulsively. "I need help with the house, and there's a small cabin where my foreman used to live before he got married and moved to his own place." Chaya looked at him with suspicion. "Why would you help me?" Jake met her gaze directly. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I know what it's like to be alone." Rivera smiled faintly, as if he understood something neither of them yet grasped. "It is a good offer, Chaya. Jake Dawson is known as an honorable man." 2 days later, Chaya was strong enough to travel. Jake had brought a wagon borrowed from a neighbor, making a pallet of blankets for her comfort. As they left Rivera's cabin, the old healer pressed a small pouch of herbs into Chaya's hand. "For healing," he said, then added with a knowing look, "of more than just the body." The journey to Jake's ranch took most of the day, giving Chaya time to observe the man who had saved her life. Jake Dawson was different from other cowboys she had encountered. There was a quietness to him, a thoughtfulness that suggested he saw the world with clearer eyes than most. As they traveled, Jake pointed out landmarks and told her about his ranch, modest compared to operations like Barton's, but sufficient for a man with simple needs. He had inherited it from his uncle 5 years ago and had been building it up slowly ever since. "What about your family?" Chaya asked, curious about the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "Don't have much of one anymore," Jake replied. "My parents died of fever when I was 12. My uncle raised me, taught me ranching. He passed on 5 years back. No brothers or sisters. Like me," Chaya said softly. Jake glanced at her, noting the strength in her face despite all she had endured. "I suppose so." They arrived at the ranch as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. It was a modest spread, a main house built of timber and stone, A barn, corrals, and a bunkhouse for the handful of men Jake employed. A short distance from the main house stood a small cabin. "That's where you can stay," Jake said, nodding toward it. "It's not much, but it's private." Chaya took in the ranch with appreciative eyes. It was neat and well-maintained, a testament to Jake's character. "It is more than I expected," she said honestly. The ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse at the sound of the wagon, their curious eyes taking in Chaya with varying degrees of surprise. Jake introduced them briefly: Tom, the oldest at around 40, Miguel, a Mexican cowboy with quick hands and a quicker smile, and young Charlie, barely 20 and still learning the trade. "Miss Morales will be staying with us," Jake said, his tone making it clear this was not up for discussion. "She'll be helping around the house." If the men had questions, they kept them to themselves, though Chaya could read the curiosity in their expressions. She was used to being an object of speculation, too Apache for some, too Mexican for others, belonging nowhere fully. Jake helped her into the cabin, which contained a small bed, a table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove, and a chest of drawers. It was simple but clean, with a window that looked out toward the main house. "I'll bring you some supper," Jake said, "and then you should rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to talk about arrangements." Alone in the cabin, Chaya sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been resigned to death. Now she was safe, at least for the moment, in the home of a man she barely knew but who had shown her more kindness than anyone since her father's death. Jake returned with a tray of food: beans, cornbread, and coffee, and set it on the table. "Is there anything else you need?" he asked, standing awkwardly by the door. "You have already done too much," Chaya replied, the gratitude in her eyes saying more than her words. Jake shifted uncomfortably, unused to such direct appreciation. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." As promised, Jake came to the cabin after breakfast the next day. Chaya had awoken feeling stronger, the good food and safe rest having done much to restore her. She found a dress hanging on the cabin door when she awoke, simple but clean, likely borrowed from someone in town. "It suits you," Jake said when she emerged wearing it. He was sitting on the small porch, whittling a piece of wood with his pocket knife. "Thank you," she said, touching the fabric self-consciously. "Whose is it?" "Widow Johnson's. She does some mending for me sometimes." I rode into town early and explained I needed a dress for a friend. He stumbled slightly over the last word, as if unsure how to define their relationship. Chaya sat beside him on the porch step, watching as his skilled hands shaped the wood. "What will I do here?" she asked directly. Jake considered this. "The house needs tending, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. I've been managing on my own, but not very well." He smiled slightly. "And if you know anything about gardens, that would be helpful. I've tried to grow vegetables, but they seem to prefer dying to feeding me." Despite herself, Chaya laughed, a sound so unexpected it surprised them both. "I can garden," she said. "My mother taught me which plants to grow together, which to keep apart." Jake nodded, pleased. "Then we have an arrangement. You'll have room and board plus a small wage. And protection." Chaya asked, her eyes suddenly serious. Jake's expression hardened. "Yes. Protection. Those men won't hurt you again, not while I'm around." It was a promise made in the quiet of a Texas morning, one that would be tested sooner than either of them expected. The days fell into a pattern. Chaya rose early, preparing breakfast for Jake and the ranch hands. She spent her mornings cleaning the main house, which had clearly suffered from the absence of a woman's touch, and her afternoons in the garden she was creating behind her cabin. Jake watched her transformation with quiet admiration. The frightened, wounded woman he had found staked to the desert floor was emerging as a person of strength and grace. She moved with purpose, her hands skillful whether cooking, mending, or planting. She spoke little of her past, but sometimes in the evenings, as they sat on the porch after supper, she would share stories her mother had told her of the Apache ways, of their deep connection to the land and its rhythms. In turn, Jake found himself opening up to her in ways he never had with anyone else. He told her of his dreams for the ranch, of the books he read by lamplight, of his belief that the frontier could be a place of opportunity rather than just conflict and conquest. The ranch hands accepted Chaya's presence with surprising ease. Miguel, in particular, seemed to appreciate having someone who spoke Spanish, often conversing with her in his native tongue. Tom, the oldest, was respectful if somewhat reserved. Young Charlie was simply in awe of her, especially after she treated a nasty cut on his hand with herbs from Rivera that healed it without infection. A month passed, and summer began to give way to early autumn. Chaya's garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables that improved everyone's meals. The main house took on a new character. Curtains appeared at windows, wildflowers in jars brightened tables, and the smell of fresh bread often wafted from the kitchen. Jake found himself looking forward to the evenings when he and Chaya would sit together, talking or sometimes just sharing comfortable silence. He caught himself watching her when she wasn't aware, the way the sun caught her dark hair, the slight smile that sometimes played at her lips when she was lost in thought, the graceful movement of her hands as she worked. It was Miguel who first noticed the change in his boss. "El Patron is falling in love," he commented to Tom one evening as they watched Jake walk Chaya back to her cabin, lingering longer than necessary at her door. Tom merely grunted. About time he had someone. Ranch is too quiet without a woman's presence. Chaya, too, was aware of the shifting nature of her feelings for Jake. She had never expected to trust a white man, let alone care for one, but Jake Dawson defied all her expectations. He treated her with respect, listened when she spoke, and never made her feel less for her heritage. In fact, he seemed genuinely interested in her culture, asking questions about Apache traditions and beliefs without the usual judgment she had come to expect. One evening in late September, they rode out together to check on a section of fence that needed repair. The work went quickly with both of them helping, and they found themselves with time to spare before sunset. Jake suggested they ride to a nearby hill that offered a view of the surrounding country. As they sat side by side on the hilltop, the Texas landscape spread out before them in a tapestry of gold and amber as the setting sun painted the prairie grasses. "I never thought I would find peace here," Chaya admitted, "in this land where my mother's people have suffered so much." Jake looked at her profile against the sunset, struck by her beauty and resilience. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood what this land means to me, not just as property, but as something to be respected." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition of the bond that had been forming, unspoken but undeniable. Jake reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and touched her hand. "Chaya," he said, her name a question and a statement at once. She turned her hand, entwining her fingers with his. It was a simple gesture but profound in its implications. Two people from worlds that had been in conflict for generations, finding connection on a hilltop in the Texas Panhandle. The moment was broken by the distant sound of riders approaching. Jake stood quickly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Get behind me," he said, his voice tense. 5 riders appeared at the base of the hill, their horses kicking up dust as they approached. Even at a distance, Jake recognized the lead rider, Richard Barton, owner of the largest ranch in the county and the man whose employees had left Chaya to die. "Stay close," Jake muttered as they mounted their horses. If anything happens, ride straight back to the ranch." Barton reined in about 20 yards away, his men flanking him. He was a large man with a florid face and small, hard eyes that settled on Chaya with recognition. "Dawson," he called, "I see you found yourself some company." Jake kept his voice level. "What brings you to my land, Barton?" Barton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just passing through, checking my boundaries. But now I'm curious about your Apache friend there. Seems my boys had some trouble with her a while back. Horse thief, if I recall." "Your boys are liars," Jake said flatly. "And they're lucky I don't press charges for attempted murder." Barton laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the hillside. "Murder of an Indian. That's rich, Dawson. Next, you'll be telling me rustling my cattle is a crime too." Jake's hand tightened on his reins. "I don't rustle cattle, Barton. Unlike some, I build my herd honestly." The accusation hung in the air between them. Everyone in the county knew Barton's herd grew suspiciously fast sometimes, with brands mysteriously altered. "Careful, Dawson," Barton warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "People who cross me tend to have accidents." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Jake asked. "That staking a woman out for coyotes is an accident." Barton's face darkened with anger. "My boys found a thief and dealt with her. If you've taken up with her, that's your business, but don't expect anyone around here to receive her kindly." "Miss Morales is under my protection," Jake said firmly. "Spread the word. Anyone who threatens her answers to me." Barton studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "You've made your position clear. Just remember, Dawson, this is cattle country. People have long memories and they don't take kindly to Indian lovers." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his men following as they rode away. Jake watched until they disappeared over the next rise, then turned to Chaya, whose face remained composed despite the confrontation. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, though her hands trembled slightly on the reins. "But he will not forget this." Men like Barton do not accept defiance. Jake knew she was right. By openly supporting her, he had made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the county. "Let's get back," he said grimly. "I need to warn the boys to keep a sharp eye out." The ride back to the ranch was silent, both of them lost in thought. The peaceful moment they had shared on the hilltop felt distant now, overshadowed by Barton's threats. When they reached the ranch, Jake called his men together and explained the situation. "Barton might try something," he told them. "Double the night watch and keep your rifles close." Miguel crossed himself. "That man is El Diablo," he muttered. "My cousin worked for him last year. The things he saw." "We can handle Barton," Jake said with more confidence than he felt. "Just stay alert." Later that night, after the ranch had settled into an uneasy quiet, Chaya came to the main house. Jake was sitting at his desk, going through ledgers by lamplight when she entered. "I should leave," she said without preamble. "I am bringing trouble to your door." Jake looked up, surprised by her directness. "Is that what you want, to leave?" Chaya hesitated. "No," she admitted, "but I will not be the cause of harm to you or your men." Jake stood and crossed the room to her. "Barton was looking for an excuse to cause trouble long before you came here. My uncle fought his land grabs, and now I do too." "But this is different," Chaya insisted. "This is about me, about what I am." "No," Jake said firmly. "This is about right and wrong. What those men did to you was wrong, and Barton knows it. He's afraid you'll bring the law down on his operation." "The law," Chaya said bitterly. "When has the law ever sided with someone like me against men like Barton?" Jake couldn't argue with her assessment. "The frontier justice system often favored the powerful over the powerless." "Then we'll handle this ourselves," he said. "Together." He took her hands in his, noting how perfectly they fit within his larger ones. I don't want you to go, Chaya. Not because of Barton, not for any reason unless it's what you truly want. The admission hung between them, fraught with meaning beyond the immediate situation. Chaya looked up at him, reading the emotion in his eyes that he couldn't fully express in words. I don't want to go, she whispered. Jake drew her closer slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, he lowered his head and kissed her, a gentle meeting of lips that deepened as she responded to him, her arms sliding up to encircle his neck. When they finally parted, Jake rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said simply. I will, she promised. The threat from Barton cast a shadow over the ranch in the days that followed. Jake increased security, making sure someone was always watching the herds and the approaches to the ranch house. He rode into town to speak with Sheriff Collins, but as expected, the lawman was reluctant to act on accusations against Barton without solid proof. Staking an Apache woman out for coyotes, the sheriff said, shaking his head. That's a serious charge, Dawson. You got witnesses. Just the victim herself, Jake admitted. Then you've got nothing that'll stick in court. My advice: keep your head down and your woman out of sight. Barton's got too many friends in high places. Jake left the sheriff's office frustrated but not surprised. He would have to handle this situation on his own. Meanwhile, Chaya refused to hide away. She continued her work around the ranch, though she no longer went into town with Jake. Their relationship deepened, their evenings now often spent in the main house rather than on her cabin porch. The ranch hands pretended not to notice when she sometimes didn't return to her cabin until morning, though Miguel could be heard humming wedding songs under his breath. October brought cooler weather and the need to prepare for winter. Jake and his men were busy bringing in the last hay crops and moving cattle to winter pastures. Chaya preserved vegetables from her garden, filling the root cellar with enough provisions to see them through the cold months. It was during this busy time that the first attack came. Jake and Miguel were returning from the north pasture when they smelled smoke. They topped a rise to see flames engulfing the hay barn, with Tom and Charlie frantically trying to control the fire. Barton, Jake growled, spurring his horse toward the ranch. By the time they reached the barn, it was clear the structure couldn't be saved. They focused on preventing the fire from spreading to other buildings, forming a bucket line from the well to douse the surrounding area. Chaya worked alongside them, her dress soaked with water and soot streaking her face. When the danger of spreading was finally contained, they stood watching as the barn collapsed in on itself, the hay inside providing fuel that would burn for hours. It was deliberate, Tom reported grimly. Found a coal oil can out back. Somebody threw it in and lit it up. Jake's face was hard with anger. Did you see anyone? Caught a glimpse of riders heading east, but they were too far off to identify, Charlie added. Jake put his arm around Chaya's shoulders. Are you all right? She nodded, her eyes on the smoldering ruins. This is only the beginning, she said softly, so only he could hear. She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, a section of fence was cut, allowing some of Jake's cattle to stray onto Barton land, where they were promptly impounded with demands for payment to retrieve them. A watering hole used by Jake's herd was found poisoned, though fortunately discovered before any cattle drank from it. And twice, shots were fired at ranch hands riding the boundaries, though whether as warnings or poor attempts at murder wasn't clear. Through it all, Jake refused to be intimidated. He paid to retrieve his cattle, cleaned out the poisoned water hole, and increased armed patrols of his land. The costs, both financial and in terms of manpower, were straining his resources, but he remained determined. Chaya watched him with growing concern. The strain was showing in the tightness around his eyes, the way his hand often strayed to his gun belt, The long hours he spent staring at maps of his property, trying to predict where the next attack might come. One night, as they lay together in his bed, she broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "We could leave," she suggested quietly. "Start somewhere new, somewhere Barton has no power." Jake pulled her closer, his chin resting on top of her head, "and let him win. Let him drive us off land that's rightfully mine, that my uncle worked his whole life to build." "Is land worth your life?" she asked. "Worth the lives of your men?" Jake was silent for a long moment. "It's not just about the land," he finally said. "It's about standing against men like Barton who think they can take whatever they want, hurt whoever they choose, and face no consequences." Chaya understood this principle all too well. Her mother's people had been fighting the same battle for generations. "Then we need a different strategy," she said. "Barton is stronger than you in men and money. You cannot win a direct fight." Jake propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with interest. "What do you suggest?" "My mother's people did not fight the way white men fight, with armies facing each other across open ground. They used the land, their knowledge of it, their ability to strike and disappear." A slow smile spread across Jake's face as he understood her meaning. "Guerrilla tactics." "I do not know this term, but yes, fight in ways he does not expect, at times he is not prepared for." Jake considered this. "It's risky. If we're caught doing anything illegal, we'll be the ones in jail, not Barton." "Then we must not be caught," Chaya said simply. "And we must not do anything that breaks your white man's laws. But there are many ways to fight that do not involve breaking laws." The next morning, Jake gathered his men and explained the new approach. Instead of simply reacting to Barton's attacks, they would become proactive but within the boundaries of the law. Their first move was information gathering. Miguel, who had friends working on several ranches in the area, began collecting intelligence on Barton's operations, his schedule, the movements of his men, the location of his herds. Tom, who had once been a tracker for the army, began following Barton's men when they were on Jake's land, learning their patterns and preferred routes. Even young Charlie contributed, using his boyish appearance to listen to gossip in town without raising suspicion. Chaya, meanwhile, drew on her knowledge of the land to help Jake identify vulnerable points on Barton's ranch, water sources that could be legally diverted, passes that could be blocked with rockslides that would appear natural, locations where cattle might be spooked by seemingly innocent stimuli. Within a week, they had compiled a detailed picture of Barton's operation and its weaknesses. Jake was impressed by the effectiveness of their intelligence gathering. "Now we need to decide how to use this information," he said. "Patience," Chaya advised. "The Apache know that sometimes the greatest weapon is to make your enemy fear what might happen, rather than what does happen." Their opportunity came when they learned that Barton was expecting a visit from potential investors from Chicago men who might provide the capital he needed to expand his operation even further. "If those investors pull out, it would hit Barton hard," Jake mused. "He's extended himself financially with his recent land purchases." "Then we must make sure they see Barton's ranch at its worst," Chaya suggested. The plan they devised was simple but effective. On the day before the investors were due to arrive, Jake and his men executed a series of perfectly legal but disruptive actions. They drove their cattle along the boundary of Barton's land, raising dust that drifted over his best grazing areas. They diverted a stream that ran through both properties, their legal right under water laws, temporarily reducing the flow to Barton's section. And they scheduled a controlled burn of brush on their side of the line, carefully managed but producing smoke that would make Barton's prized view less impressive. None of these actions was illegal, and none could be definitively linked to deliberate sabotage. But together, they presented Barton's ranch in a most unfavorable light just as his important visitors arrived. The results exceeded their expectations. The Chicago investors, already nervous about frontier investments, were unimpressed by the dusty, smoky property with its temporarily reduced water supply. Word reached Jake through Miguel's contacts that the investors had declined Barton's proposal, citing concerns about the stability and management of the operation. Barton was furious. He knew Jake was behind the coincidental timing of these events, but could prove nothing. His frustration manifested in a direct confrontation when Jake next went into Amarillo for supplies. Barton cornered him outside the general store, two of his men flanking him. "You think you're clever, Dawson," he snarled, "playing your little games." Jake remained calm, though his hand stayed near his holster. "I don't know what you're talking about, Barton. I'm just running my ranch as I see fit." "You cost me a lot of money this week," Barton said, stepping closer. "That's not something I forget or forgive." "Sounds like a personal problem," Jake replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have supplies to load." Barton's face flushed with anger. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. And your Apache woman, she'd better watch her back. Indians have accidents all the time in these parts." Jake's control slipped at the direct threat to Chaya. In one swift motion, he had Barton pinned against the wall of the store, his forearm pressed against the larger man's throat. "Listen carefully," Jake said, his voice low and deadly. "If anything happens to her, anything at all, I will hold you personally responsible. And unlike you, I don't send others to do my fighting for me." Sheriff Collins, attracted by the commotion, hurried over. "Break it up, boys," he ordered. "Take your quarrels elsewhere." Jake released Barton and stepped back. "Just having a friendly conversation about boundaries, Sheriff." "Right, Barton." Barton straightened his coat, his eyes cold with hatred. "Right, very friendly." He turned and walked away, his men following after shooting warning glances at Jake. The sheriff eyed Jake skeptically. "You're playing with fire, Dawson. Barton doesn't take kindly to being challenged." "Neither do I," Jake replied. "Especially when it involves staking innocent women out for coyotes." Collins sighed. "I heard about that. Can't say I approve, but you're not going to win this fight. Barton has too many connections, too much money." "We'll see," Jake said, turning to his wagon. "Justice has a way of finding even the most powerful eventually." When Jake returned to the ranch and told Chaya about the confrontation, she was quiet for a long moment. "He will strike again," she finally said. "And next time it will be worse." "I know," Jake acknowledged, "which is why we need to be prepared." They increased security again, never leaving the ranch buildings unattended and moving in pairs when working the range. Jake sent word to a friend who had moved to New Mexico, asking for temporary help from men he could trust. November arrived with an early cold snap, bringing frost to the mornings and long, dark evenings. Jake and Chaya's relationship continued to deepen through these challenging times. The threat hanging over them had accelerated their emotional connection, stripping away pretenses and forcing honesty between them. One evening, as they sat before the fire in the main house, Jake took Chaya's hand in his. "When this is over," he said, "when we've dealt with Barton one way or another, would you consider making this arrangement permanent?" Chaya looked at him questioningly. "Permanent?" Jake smiled slightly. "I'm asking if you'd marry me, Chaya Morales, properly, legally, in front of witnesses." Chaya's eyes widened. Despite their growing closeness, she hadn't expected this step. Marriage between whites and Indians, even half Apache women, was uncommon and often met with disapproval. "You would face censure," she said softly. "People would talk." "Let them," Jake replied, his voice firm. I love you. I want to build a life with you, have a family with you. The rest of the world can accept it or not, makes no difference to me." Tears welled in Chaya's eyes, but before she could respond, a shout came from outside, followed by the crack of a rifle. Jake was on his feet instantly, grabbing his gun belt as he moved to the window. "Fire!" came another shout, this time recognizable as Miguel's voice. "The bunkhouse!" Jake and Chaya rushed outside to see flames already engulfing one end of the bunkhouse. Tom was helping a limping Charlie from the building, while Miguel exchanged gunfire with unseen assailants in the darkness beyond the ranch yard. "Get down!" Jake yelled, pulling Chaya behind the water trough as bullets splintered the wood around them. For several minutes, chaos reigned. Shots came from multiple directions, indicating at least 4 or 5 attackers. Jake returned fire strategically, trying to cover his men as they sought shelter. "We need to get to the barn," Jake told Chaya. "There's more ammunition there and rifles with better range." They made a run for it during a lull in the shooting, reaching the barn safely. Jake quickly distributed rifles and ammunition to his men who had gathered there. Charlie's leg was bleeding from what looked like a bullet graze, and Tom was wrapping it with a bandana. "How many?" Jake asked. "At least 6, Miguel reported. "They hit the bunkhouse first, then started shooting when we came out." The bunkhouse was now fully engulfed in flames, providing an eerie light to the ranch yard and making them visible targets if they ventured out. "They're trying to draw us out," Jake said grimly. "We stay put, defend the barn and the house." For what seemed like hours but was probably less than 30 minutes, they exchanged sporadic fire with the attackers. Then, suddenly, there was silence from beyond the ranch yard. "They're pulling back," Tom observed after several minutes without incoming fire. Jake wasn't convinced. "Or repositioning. Stay sharp." But the attack didn't resume. Eventually, Miguel ventured a careful reconnaissance and reported that the attackers appeared to have withdrawn completely. By dawn, the bunkhouse was a smoldering ruin, but thankfully no other buildings had caught fire. Charlie's leg wound was minor, and no one else had been injured. But the message was clear: Barton had escalated from property damage to attempted murder. "This ends now," Jake said as they gathered in the main house, exhaustion evident on everyone's faces. "I'm riding into town to file formal charges with the sheriff. Attempted murder, even of ranch hands, is something even Collins can't ignore." "You will need proof," Chaya pointed out. "And witnesses who will speak against Barton." "We all will," Tom said firmly, surprising Jake. The older man had always been reserved, particularly around Chaya. "I've worked this land for 15 years, and I've watched Barton's operation grow through theft and intimidation. It's time someone stood against him." Miguel and Charlie nodded their agreement. "We stand with you, Patron," Miguel said. "All of us." Jake was moved by their loyalty. "It will be dangerous," he warned. "Barton won't take this lying down." "We know," Charlie said, wincing as he shifted his bandaged leg. "But Miss Morales has taught us something about fighting smart instead of just fighting hard." Chaya smiled at the young cowboy, touched by his words. Her acceptance on the ranch had been gradual but complete. These men, who might once have viewed her with suspicion because of her heritage, now treated her as one of their own. "Then let's prepare our case carefully," Jake said. "We need to document everything: the attacks, the timing, the patterns that point to Barton. And," he added, "we need to find someone who will testify about what happened to Chaya." "You mean what Barton's men did to her?" Tom asked, his face hardening. "Staking her out," Jake nodded. "It's the most serious crime, and it establishes a pattern of violence that makes these recent attacks more believable." Chaya had been quiet, but now she spoke up. "There is someone who might help us. The old Mexican who tends bar at the saloon in Amarillo. He was there when Barton's men took me. He did not intervene. He was afraid, but he saw everything. Jake remembered the man Manuel Ortiz, an elderly Mexican who had been a fixture in Amarillo for decades. Would he testify? He asked skeptically. It would be risky for him. I do not know, Chaya admitted, but he has kind eyes. And he crossed himself when they dragged me out. It was a slim hope, but they had few options. Jake decided to ride into town that afternoon, taking Miguel with him for backup. Before they left, he found a moment alone with Chaya. You never answered my question, he reminded her, taking her hands in his. About making this permanent. Chaya's eyes softened. Yes, she said simply. When this is over, I will marry you, Jake Dawson. Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Then I have even more reason to see this through, he murmured against her hair. The ride to Amarillo was tense, both men alert for ambush. But they reached town without incident and went first to the sheriff's office to file a formal complaint about the night's attack. Sheriff Collins listened skeptically but took down the details. You're making serious accusations, Dawson, he said when Jake had finished. Attempted murder, arson. These aren't minor charges. I have 3 witnesses besides myself, Jake pointed out, and physical evidence at the ranch. Collins sighed. I'll ride out tomorrow to take a look, but without someone directly linking Barton to the attack, it's still your word against his. Jake had expected this response. There's more, he said, and proceeded to tell Collins about what had happened to Chaya months earlier. The sheriff's expression grew troubled as Jake described finding Chaya staked out for coyotes. That's barbaric, he admitted, even for these parts. And we may have a witness, Jake pressed. Someone who saw Barton's men take her. Who? Manuel Ortiz from the saloon. Collins raised his eyebrows. The old Mexican. His word won't count for much in court, Dawson. It will if it's corroborated by physical evidence and a pattern of similar behavior, Jake argued. The sheriff considered this. Talk to Ortiz. If he's willing to make a statement, bring him to me. I'll do what I can within the law. It wasn't a strong commitment, but it was better than nothing. Jake and Miguel headed to the saloon next, finding it nearly empty in the late afternoon. Manuel Ortiz was behind the bar, slowly wiping glasses with a cloth. He looked up warily as they approached, his eyes lingering on Miguel with a hint of recognition, one Mexican to another in a predominantly white town. Señor Ortiz, Jake began, keeping his voice low. We need to speak with you about something that happened a few months ago. The old man's expression remained neutral, but his hands stilled on the glass he was cleaning. I know many things that happen in this town, señor. Not all of them are my business. Jake leaned closer. It's about a woman, an Apache woman who was taken from this saloon by Barton's men. They accused her of stealing a horse. Ortiz's eyes flickered with recognition, then darted around the room as if checking for listeners. I remember, he said quietly. A terrible thing. But what can an old man do against such men? You can tell the truth, Jake said. She survived Manuel. I found her and cut her free. She lives at my ranch now. Surprise and what looked like relief crossed the bartender's weathered face. Gracias a Dios, he murmured. I lit candles for her soul. I thought surely she was dead. She needs your help now, Miguel interjected in Spanish. Barton's men attacked our ranch last night, shot at us, burned our bunkhouse. It will not stop until someone stands against them. Ortiz's hands trembled slightly as he set down the glass. What you ask? It would make me a target. Barton's reach is long in this town. I know, Jake acknowledged. But without your testimony, he'll keep hurting people, not just us others too weak to fight back. The old man was silent for a long moment, conflict evident in his eyes. Finally, he sighed deeply. My wife, she always said I talk too much. Perhaps this once it will do some good. He looked directly at Jake. "I will tell what I saw, for the woman and for others who cannot speak." Relief washed over Jake. "Thank you. We'll go to the sheriff now if you're willing." Ortiz nodded, calling to another employee to watch the bar. As they walked the short distance to the sheriff's office, Jake felt a cautious optimism. With Ortiz's testimony and his men's accounts of the recent attack, they might finally have enough to force Collins to act against Barton. The sheriff was surprised to see them return so quickly, and even more surprised that Ortiz had agreed to testify. He took the bartender's statement carefully, asking clarifying questions about dates and the specific men involved. When Ortiz had finished his account, describing in detail how Barton's foreman and 2 other men had dragged Chaya from the saloon, accusing her loudly of horse theft and making crude remarks about teaching the Indian a lesson, Collins sat back in his chair with a troubled expression. "This matches what Dawson told me," he admitted, "and it's specific enough about the men involved to warrant investigation." He looked at Jake. "I'll ride out to your ranch tomorrow to document the damage from last night. Then I'll pay a visit to Barton's place with these accusations." Jake wasn't entirely satisfied. "Barton is dangerous, Sheriff. If you warn him we're building a case, he might take more drastic action. Or he might back off, knowing he's under scrutiny," Collins countered. "Either way, I have to follow procedure. I can't just arrest a man of Barton's standing without due process." It was the best they could hope for at present. Jake thanked Ortiz again and assured him they would do everything possible to protect him from retaliation. As they prepared to leave town, Jake noticed a rider watching them from across the street, one of Barton's men, making no attempt to hide his surveillance. "We're being watched," he murmured to Miguel. "I know," the Mexican replied calmly, "since we entered town." There was another behind the mercantile earlier. "Ride careful on the way back," Jake advised. "They might try to prevent us from reaching the ranch." But their return journey was uneventful, suggesting that Barton's men were content with monitoring their movements for now. When they arrived at the ranch, they found Chaya and the others had been busy reinforcing defenses, boarding up vulnerable windows, positioning water barrels strategically in case of fire, and creating firing positions that covered all approaches to the main buildings. Jake briefed everyone on the outcome of their visit to town. Collins will be here tomorrow to document the attack, and Ortiz agreed to testify about what happened to Chaya. "Will it be enough?" Tom asked skeptically. "Maybe not by itself," Jake admitted, "but it's a start. Once Collins begins an official investigation, others might come forward. Barton has made enemies over the years. Or they might be too afraid to speak," Chaya pointed out. "Fear is a powerful silencer." That night, they set a double watch, with Tom and Charlie taking the first shift while Jake, Chaya, and Miguel tried to get some rest. Jake and Chaya lay together in his bed, neither sleeping despite their exhaustion. "I have been thinking," Chaya said, her head resting on his chest. "About what happens after Barton? Yes, about us, about the future." She propped herself up to look at him. "When I agreed to marry you, I meant it. But have you truly considered what it will mean? Children who will be part white, part Mexican, part Apache. The way people will look at them, at us." Jake traced her cheek with his finger. "I've considered it, and I decided that any child of ours will have the best of all worlds, your strength and wisdom, my stubbornness, and a home where they're valued for exactly who they are." Chaya smiled, though her eyes remained serious. "The world beyond this ranch will not be so accepting." "Then we'll change the world," Jake said simply. "Or at least our corner of it. I've never been one to let others dictate how I should live or who I should love." She settled back against him, comforted by his certainty even as her own doubts lingered. The West was changing, she knew. The old ways, both of her mother's people and of the frontier itself, were giving way to new orders, new boundaries. Perhaps there would be a place in this evolving world for a family like the one they hoped to create. Dawn brought Sheriff Collins as promised. He methodically documented the burned bunkhouse, the bullet holes in various buildings, and took statements from all the ranch hands. To Jake's surprise, the sheriff seemed genuinely disturbed by the evidence. This was a coordinated attack, Collins admitted as they walked the property. Not just vandalism or intimidation. Somebody meant to do serious harm. That's what we've been telling you, Jake said. Barton wants my land and he's not particular about how he gets it. Collins shook his head. Wanting land is one thing. Attempted murder is another. I'll confront Barton with this today, see what he has to say for himself. Be careful, Jake warned. He won't take kindly to accusations. The sheriff patted his revolver. I've been dealing with tough cases for 20 years, Dawson. I know how to handle myself. After Collins departed, Jake and his men continued strengthening the ranch's defenses while keeping up with essential daily work. Chaya remained inside the main house at Jake's insistence, though she chafed at the restriction. I am not helpless, she reminded him when he checked on her midday. My mother taught me to use a knife before I could walk, and my father showed me how to shoot when I was 12. Jake smiled at her fierce expression. I know you're not helpless, but right now you're our most important witness. If anything happened to you, she softened at his concern. Nothing will happen. We will see this through together. Evening approached with no word from Collins. Jake's worry grew as darkness fell with still no sign of the sheriff. Had Barton somehow intercepted him? Or worse, had Collins decided to side with the powerful rancher despite the evidence? His questions were answered just after midnight when the sound of approaching riders alerted the watch. Jake and Miguel took positions with rifles while Tom signaled from his lookout that at least 4 riders were approaching slowly and openly, not like attackers. Hold your fire, Jake called when he recognized Sheriff Collins leading the group. It's the sheriff. Collins and 3 deputies rode into the ranch yard. The sheriff's face was grim in the lantern light as he dismounted. Dawson, he acknowledged. We need to talk. Jake led him into the house, where Chaya waited anxiously. Collins removed his hat when he saw her, a gesture of respect that surprised Jake. Madam, the sheriff said with a nod, I owe you an apology. When Dawson first told me what had happened to you, I didn't give it the attention it deserved. Chaya regarded him cautiously. And now? Now I've heard enough to believe every word. He turned to Jake. I confronted Barton this afternoon with the evidence from the attack on your ranch and with Ortiz's statement about what happened to Miss Morales. How did he respond? Jake asked. Denied everything, of course. But one of his men, a young fella named Wilson, got nervous when I started detailing exactly what had been done to Miss Morales. I could see it in his face. So I took him aside, put some pressure on him, and he broke. Admitted he was part of the group that took her from town and... Collins paused, glancing uncomfortably at Chaya. Well, that did what was done to her. And Barton, Jake pressed. Did Wilson implicate him directly? Collins nodded. Said Barton gave the orders himself. Make an example of the Indian thief were his exact words, according to Wilson. And he confirmed that Barton personally ordered the attack on your ranch with instructions to burn you out completely. Jake let out a slow breath. So you've arrested Barton, the sheriff's expression tightened. Tried to. He resisted, drew on us. There was a firefight. Barton and one of his men were killed. 2 others surrendered and are in my jail now, including Wilson. A heavy silence filled the room as the news sank in. Barton dead. The threat that had hung over them for months suddenly ended with a few bullets. It's over then, Chaya said quietly, her voice holding a note of disbelief. Collins nodded. The legal part, at least. Those men in my jail will stand trial for attempted murder and for what was done to you, Miss Morales. They'll likely hang or spend the rest of their lives in prison. And Barton's ranch, Jake asked, thinking practically. His operation, that'll be sorted out by the courts, I expect. He has no family that anyone knows of. Most likely the bank will take it over, sell it off in parcels. Collins put his hat back on. I came tonight to let you know the immediate danger is past. You can stand down your defenses. After the sheriff and his deputies departed, promising to return for formal statements in the morning, Jake, Chaya, and the ranch hands gathered in the main house. The news had left them all stunned, struggling to adjust to the sudden removal of a threat that had dominated their lives for so long. It doesn't seem real, Charlie said, voicing what they all felt. Oh, it's real enough, Tom replied. I've seen men like Barton before. They think they are untouchable until suddenly they're not. Justice catches up eventually. Miguel crossed himself. Dios has a way of balancing accounts. Jake looked at Chaya, who had been unusually quiet. What are you thinking? He asked softly. She met his gaze, her dark eyes thoughtful. I am thinking about cycles. My mother's people believe that all things move in cycles: life and death, peace and war, justice and injustice. Perhaps this is the closing of one cycle and the beginning of another. A better one, Jake suggested, taking her hand. Yes, she agreed with a small smile. A better one. The following weeks brought significant changes. True to Collins' prediction, Barton's ranch was seized by the bank and divided into smaller parcels for sale. Jake purchased one section that adjoined his property, using savings he'd been accumulating for years. The men who had participated in Chaya's torture and the attack on the ranch stood trial in Amarillo. Manuel Ortiz testified bravely, as did Chaya herself, facing her tormentors with a dignity that impressed everyone in the courtroom. The jury took less than an hour to find the defendants guilty, and the judge sentenced them to hang. Justice had been served, but for Chaya and Jake, the more important task was building their future. In early December, with snow dusting the Texas plains, they were married in a small ceremony at the ranch. Sheriff Collins attended, as did Old Man Rivera, who had come to check on Chaya's healing and stayed to bless their union. The ranch hands stood as witnesses, and even a few townsfolk from Amarillo who had been impressed by Chaya's courage at the trial came to offer their good wishes. I never thought I would find this, Chaya whispered to Jake as they danced together that evening, the main house filled with music and laughter. A place to belong, people who accept me for who I am. I never thought I'd find you, Jake replied, holding her close. Someone who understands this land the way I do, who sees beyond what is to what could be. Spring came early to the Texas Panhandle in 1876. The ranch flourished under Jake and Chaya's joint management. Her knowledge of plants and natural cycles complemented his practical ranching experience, resulting in healthier cattle and more productive crops. By summer, Chaya's garden had expanded to include medicinal herbs that drew people from miles around seeking remedies for various ailments. She began teaching Charlie's new wife, a shy girl from town, about traditional healing practices, creating a bridge between the Apache ways and the settler community. In late autumn, as golden light bathed the prairie grasses, Chaya gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas Rivera Dawson, honoring both their loyal ranch hand and the healer who had saved Chaya's life. The baby had his father's strong jaw and his mother's dark, intelligent eyes. He will know all of his heritage, Chaya promised as she nursed the infant. The Apache ways of respecting the earth, the Mexican traditions of family and celebration, and the frontier spirit of building something that lasts. Jake, watching them with wonder, knew that the cycle Chaya had spoken of was continuing. What had begun with an act of cruelty, a woman staked out for coyotes, had transformed into something beautiful. A family, a home, a future. The Texas Panhandle was still a harsh land, still caught in the tensions between different cultures and ways of life. But on the Dawson Ranch, a new path was being forged, one of respect, understanding, and love that transcended boundaries. As winter approached again, Jake and Chaya stood together on the hill where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. Their son slept peacefully in Chaya's arms, wrapped warmly against the chill. "You ever think about how it all began?" Jake asked, his arm around her shoulders. "How close we came to never having this," Chaya nodded, her eyes on the distant horizon where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple. "Every day, it reminds me never to take any of this for granted." "I was just a cowboy looking for a stray steer," Jake mused. "If I had taken a different route that day." "But you didn't," Chaya reminded him. "You found me. You carried me to medicine, and in doing so, you became my medicine as well." Jake smiled at the poetic truth of her words. He had saved her life that day in the desert, but she had saved his soul, showing him a way of seeing the world that was deeper, richer, more connected than he had ever imagined. As they walked back to the ranch house, lights glowing warmly in the windows against the gathering dusk, Jake reflected that some journeys begin in the darkest moments. His had started when he found a woman staked out for death. Hers when she opened her eyes to see a cowboy cutting her bonds. And together, they had created a path neither could have walked alone, one that would continue long after they were gone, in the lives of their children and their children's children, a legacy of love that had begun in the wild heart of the Texas frontier.